Hello and welcome to Nature Live from the Natural History Museum, the show where we have in-depth conversations with scientists from around the museum and all over the world, talking about everything from dinosaur fossils and deep-sea volcanoes to carnivorous plants and cutting-edge DNA research. Now, you might have heard about the unique and amazing wildlife that can evolve on remote islands out in the ocean. But what about islands in the sky? Well, over the next half hour, we're going to find out some more. The conversation's open to you as well, so if you've got any questions or comments, do pop them in the chat and we'll come to as many as we can. So to chat about these amazing places and what you can find there, I've got Marie Curie fellow Philippe Kok. Hi Philippe, thanks for joining us.
Hi Khalil, hi everyone.
So let's open up with a little bit of an introduction to what are sky islands?
So these sky islands, they're actually called tepuis. So you have an example here, which is Raima tepui, which is one of the best known tepuis because it's accessible by foot. So you can actually visit it.
It doesn't look accessible by foot.
No, there is only one way to access it, and you can see it from this view. It's on the other side. And these mountains are actually sandstone, made in sandstone, and they are probably the oldest rocks exposed on Earth. So they date before the dinosaurs, before life was on Earth. So if you drill in this rock, you will find nothing.
Wow.
No fossils, absolutely nothing. It's just only rock. And so there is a cool hypothesis is that in the past there was one big, huge tepui, and what all the tepuis that you have now, that you can still see now, they are the result of erosion, and probably that over each of these tepui there was a lake, and the action of the water on the rock, so the percolation of the water on the rock, made these remnant tepuis more solid, and so they resisted erosion much better than the rest. There is something else that is really interesting, is that there was probably more than a kilometer of rock on the top of each of the tepui as you can see them today. So all of this was eroded.
Oh, wow. So I guess because they're so old, there's been so much time for all of those layers above to be eroded and in the soft bits in between.
Indeed. So it's millions and millions of years.
And these might be, really unfamiliar environments to a lot of people, but I mean, I think some of our audience might recognize them more than they think from certain cultural kind of references and films and stuff.
Probably first from books, because there is a very famous book by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, The Lost World, which actually, he was inspired by the very first expeditions on tepuis. So the story is about kind of a crazy scientist going there in search of dinosaurs, and he found dinosaurs in a very ancient civilization, actually on the top of Raima.
And that was the inspiration for the Jurassic Park series by Michael Crichton, right?
Yes, for also the movie Up. Maybe you remember that with that old guy going on a tepui.
Well, you can see from this picture, this looks a lot like the tepui in Up, where they land and where Kevin's family live.
Yes, so they are actually almost every tepui has its own personality. So you have tepuis that are highly vegetated, and some tepuis that are more like rocky and look a bit more like the moon.
Well, I think we've got some pictures of that as well, because like you said, every tepui is different. So here's one of the ones that I guess is more habitable.
This is the typical picture. When you show it, people think that there are some cattle grazing on this, but no, this is the normal vegetation. This is Amuri tepui. And it all depends of the elevation of the summit, of course, because when you have summit that are above 2,700 meters, you have much less vegetation than here. For instance, this is a Maurici tepui, where there is a big lake, where actually you would not be surprised to see a dinosaur.
I was thinking the exact same thing. If I, climbed up a mountain and I started seeing this, I would feel like I was either, back in time or on an alien planet or something.
And this one is actually not even climbable. You need a helicopter to go there.
The isolation is really beautiful. And you said there were some that when you get above, what you said, 2,700 meters?
Yeah, approximately, I would say above 2005, 2600 meters is more like this. So this is really moon-like
Yeah.
with barely any vegetation. So that's the top of Raima. There you really feel you are in another world.
So are the tops of these Tapori, are they all flat?
Uh, from the distance, they look flat. But when you are there, it's not flat at all because you have lots of crevices as well. So sometimes it's really hard to cross them because you face huge crevices that you can't pass. You have to find a way to go around them or to go inside them and come again on the other side. You have lots of, on some tepuis, you have lots of rivers, like the previous one was on Oyan. This is on a Prada tepui with Stefania sateles that you can see on the left side of the
Oh, is that
picture.
the little frog?
Yeah, it's a frog.
And what's the weather like up here? You know, we've talked about what the landscape is like, but what's the temperature, the
So
water, the
the
sun?
weather
What's it all like?
the weather is crazy there. So it's pretty cold compared to the lowlands, because in the lowlands the temperature is easily more than 30 degrees. You have savannas, you have rainforest, but on the top the temperature can drop to 0 degrees, and with the wind chill it looks even like it's less than that. I think the lowest, I'm not even sure they recorded it, but ice in his metal cup on the summit of Raima one morning. So the temperature can go probably slightly below zero. I think the lowest temperature I recorded was like 4 degrees.
Wow. And that's not something you expect when you're going on a field trip to Southern or Central America, you know?
Not really. And well, during the rainy season, it can rain for more than 10 days in a row. I remember that we recorded, it can rain more in one day than a month in Belgium. And Belgium is a bit like UK, you know, it's not really a dry country.
Hmm. I think we're experiencing that in the UK
Yeah,
right now.
exactly.
And when you get that high up, you're pretty close to the sun as well, as in, obviously
So
it's still
yes,
very
yes,
far away, but
because
you don't have much protection.
solar radiation, UV radiation is also extremely high. So this is a lot to take for the animals living there, because they have to cope with all this harsh environment.
And well, we're going to see later what kind of creatures can flourish in such a harsh environment. I think we got a little clue on screen here today. But let's go to a couple of questions from our audience, because we've had one from James, who's asking about, well, kind of a bit more about your work on these Tapori. And James is asking, what's the longest you've spent up at this kind of elevation in these environments, and
So
what do you do when you're up there?
okay, I think I broke all the records because usually people, when they go, they use the helicopter. Well, when scientists go, they use the helicopter, they go, they sample. Usually the helicopter is waiting with the rotor still moving, because the pilots, they don't want to stop the helicopter there, because if it doesn't start again, they are stuck. But I stayed, I think my longest stay was 86 days. No, not 86 days. I'm exaggerating. I think it was, yeah, 86 days. Uh,
Wow, that's
I
nearly
stayed
3 months.
on the summit of a tepuis. So we are doing some ecological work. So we need to stay long, because we need to do lots of observation, lots of behavioral tests in our field lab. So we need to stay for quite long.
How do you get all the equipment up there? Is it by helicopter, or do you kind
So
of?
it depends. So when we can climb the tepui, we climb with porters. Well, we carry also stuff, and we have local porters helping us. Otherwise, we carry everything with the helicopter.
Wow, that sounds like such a, because there's such an otherworldly vibe to the tops of these Tapori. It must be weird, kind of going up there into this other world for a couple of months, and then coming back down into the normal world. It must be a bit of a transition.
Well, it depends what you call the normal world. For me, it's more,
True.
for me, it's more more there than here. But yeah, it's very strange. I mean, there are two things that are very surprising when you come back: is the smell, because
Hmm.
over there is no pollution that you can smell, and the noise, because you can really experience the true silence there when the weather is okay. Uh,
That sounds beautiful.
yeah, it's really, it's even at some point you start to have kind of a auditory, I don't know if you can say that in English, auditory hallucination. So you
Hmm.
hear stuff that don't exist because there is so much silence, you are not used to it.
Your brain just fills it in.
Yes.
Well, I guess my tinnitus would have something to say about that. We've had another question from Danny, who's asking more about your work and saying, so when you're up there, are you camping? Do you have to, take training in survival skills and stuff like that?
I never trained in survival skills, but I did a lot of field work in my life, so I'm used to it. So yes, we camp. So we have tents, which has to be really really good, because to give you an example, when I started to do my tepuis work, it happened to me once. So first, your tent, you can't really pitch it because it's rock. So you have to actually pitch it with other rocks. So you attach the rock, and I had it once. The wind was so strong that my tent moved with me, all my equipment inside, and it was pushed by the wind. So you imagine the strength of the wind you have over there.
Yeah, and how far were you from the edge?
Far enough. So yeah, that's the main thing that is frightening there, is the weather, because you have lightning strikes, and because you're at the top of these flat mountains, and the only metallic parts are actually your tent and some of your equipment. This is probably the most dangerous. It's lightning.
Wow. Well, glad you made it through to be able to talk to us today. We're going to move on to our next bit of our conversation in a sec. But you, the audience at home, please do keep those questions and comments coming in, because if you've got anything on your mind, now's the time to ask it. And if you are enjoying the show as well, there should be a donate button just to the next to the chat. We are a charity, and your support's really appreciated. So we've talked about what it's like up there and what it's like working up there. But I mean, you go for a couple of months at a time, but there's things that live up there all the time. So how do organisms cope with such harsh conditions at the top of these tepuis?
Yeah, that's part of my research, is to understand how they do. So I have a big project, which is not my Marie Curie, which is another project, because my Marie Curie is about population genomics. So I'm trying to understand the relationship of populations on a single tepui and across tepuis. But my other project is about ecophysiology. So and it started with some really interesting observations. So I realized that these toads, they bask on dry ground, which is very rare for an amphibian, because the amphibian, they are very sensitive to desiccation, as you may know, because they have a very permeable skin. So usually when a frog is basking, it's basking in the water, like, these water frogs, these green frogs you have here in the UK and we have in Europe. So when they bask, they are in the water because they suck the water, they evaporate, so they cool down. But
So what are they basking for?
probably to accelerate metabolism. Uh,
Okay, so they're basking to warm up, but they're also
but
trying to not dry out too much.
yes, but for the toads, we don't know. We are not sure. That's what I'm trying to understand.
Okay.
So that means that they probably have some special adaptation to be able to bask on a dry ground and not desiccating. And so we did other really cool observations. Is that so? We did some experiments to try to understand what is their voluntary thermal maximum. So that's the temperature at which they feel so uncomfortable that they leave the little box in which we put them. And some were a little bit dumber than others. They forgot to leave, and so they ended up completely desiccated. And I was pretty sure they were dead because they
So
were.
like when you fall asleep on when you're sunbathing and you
Yes,
should have gone inside a long time ago, but you end
yes.
up all kind of dried and burnt.
But usually you wake up before dying. But these dogs, these toads, they didn't. So because I don't like to waste specimens, I wanted to keep them, to fix them, to bring them back to the museum. So I left them in little box with moist paper. And the next day, very surprisingly, they were alive and kicking. So they completely recovered from this really high level of desiccation. So this is something really interesting to study.
Yeah, they came back from almost dead.
Almost, yes. Although we don't know because we didn't check their heartbeat. But really, I've seen these specimens. I've seen dead, desiccated frogs, and to me, they were dead.
So how long can they stay like this? Can they just mummify themselves for ages and can come back?
That we don't know. That we don't know. It's probably only for a short amount of time because when I was doing field work, not in our field lab, but in the wild, we found some of these toads indeed dead of desiccation. Because there are really strong differences between the dry season and the wet season on Tapoy. So during the dry season, the relative hygrometry can drop to 14%, which is extremely
14% humidity is
yes,
very dry.
It's very dry. And these toads, they are highly philopatric, so they don't like to move much. And we realized that some, well, it seems that they rather die than moving. So probably that some they can survive, like I said with the example I gave earlier, but some they push it too much and they go too far in the desiccation and they just die. And
well,
so that's
I think we've all kind of been there when you're really comfortable and you really don't want to move. You know you should get up and get some water, but you kind of want to stay where you are. These toads take it to the extreme.
Yeah.
Because 14% humidity, that's you told me before the show, that's more like a desert than a kind of misty mountain.
Like a desert. So yeah, it's really dry.
And we've got a couple more questions from our audience. Julie is asking, whether what types of creatures apart from amphibians like frogs and toads are living up there. Are there any birds that fly that high and live up on these tepuis?
So again, it depends from a tepuis to another one, but on most tepuis you have quite a lot of birds. You have some species that are endemic to tepuis, so they live only on the tepuis. Some other they travel between the lowlands, uplands to the summit of the tepuis. You have, for instance, a really nice little parakeet. So they live in the uplands, and at night they come and sleep on tepuis summits, on the ground. So they go in the vegetation and they sleep there.
I guess it's safer than the surrounding area, maybe?
It is safer for them, most likely. And you have few mammals. So you have the coati. I don't know if you see what is a coati.
A coati is kind of like almost like a kind of cat ferret
with a long nose
thing.
Yeah, with a long nose.
With a kind of almost like a raccoon type thing.
Yes. Yeah. And it's really interesting because these coatis that live on Tapoy summit, they all have the same phenotype, which is a different phenotypes that the coatis that are living in the uplands and lowlands. So that's also something, no one is studying this, but it's pretty interesting. And so you also have some rodents, and you have some of these species are endemic to Tapoy summit. So for instance, a few years ago, I rediscovered a little mouse that lives only on Raima and on the next Tapoy. And that is also cool with this research, is that we see lots of animals that we are less than 10 people on Earth who have actually seen them alive.
Wow.
Which is quite cool.
Yeah, that's special. And I think that answer kind of leads us into our next question from Timothy, who's asking, oh, sorry, not from Timothy. This was from Miss Nini, who's asking you, what attracts you to working in such a harsh environment? And I guess, having such unique experiences must be part of it.
Okay, let's try to make it short. It's a long story. So it started when I was a kid. I was reading The Lost World by Conan Doyle and lots of books about scientific expeditions. And that's the first thing I wanted to do. I wanted to explore. It's nice to discover, But for me, it's that exploration part that is the most exciting. So that's something really I wanted to do. So I started to work mainly in Guyana, in the rainforest, but I could see the tepuis far away, and they looked so strange that I always thought, okay, one day I'm going. But it's really difficult because very few of them are accessible by foot. So, and I think it's like in 2007 that I climbed the first one, which was in Guyana, Maring Matepui. And once I was on the summit, I knew, okay, this is my system. I'm going to study this. This is so cool.
I
And
can imagine, seeing a tepui from far away, and it's got to be the most tantalizing thing you can kind of see. It's this
yeah,
big flat thing that you can't see the top of, and it's kind of
and also
inaccessible.
you see it's almost impossible to go there. So it's even more attractive because it seems not doable.
Right? It's the challenge.
It's a challenge, yes.
And we've had another question from Timothy this time. And we've been talking about the differences between the different tipui and their different heights and stuff. But what is a kind of approximate height range for these structures?
So the highest tepuis are about 3,000 meters in elevation, so 3 kilometers, and the smallest ones are about like 1,600.
So a pretty big range, but still all
Yeah.
huge.
Yes.
Nothing you could easily just stroll up.
No, for many we need the helicopter. So there are only a few tepuis that you can actually climb. For the other ones, you need the helicopter.
So we've got a couple more questions, but we'll come to them near the end of the show because I want to get to this last bit of our conversation because we talked about the conditions at the top of these tipui and how some of the organisms adapt to the extreme life up there. But you've touched on how old they are. But being up there for so long, there must be a lot of complex evolutionary relationships up there, and that's part of
So,
what you study, right?
yeah, it's actually a very complex matter because so for very long we thought, and actually scientists were quite inspired also by the book by Conan Doyle, because many scientists thought, okay, these animals are extremely old. They are isolated there for millions of years. So we even thought that they were related to African genera. And I discovered when I did my PhD, I discovered that actually it's the opposite. All these species are very recent. The genera are pretty old, but not that old. But the species are very recent, which means that there was probably lots of extinction. And what is really interesting is that you have on different tepui summits, which are nowadays really isolated, you have populations that are genetically extremely close. And that's also something I'm trying to understand. How is that possible? Because it would mean that there might be gene flow between the tepuis, which looks impossible. When you see these small toes 2 centimeters long, you can't imagine them leaving the top of the tepui, going down more than 2,000 meters, crossing the forest, rainforest, a completely different habitat, climbing the other tepui. That looks.
Well, unless these toads have helicopters that we don't know about.
That's the thing. So one of the possibilities is that they do what we call passive dispersal, which means that, for instance, they are blown away by the wind, which means that they could go from a tepui to another one, or they could travel by birds. So that's also one of the hypotheses I'm studying right now.
Wow. So some kind of like bird Uber for these
Yeah,
toads.
I'm not too sure about the birds. I'm more in favor of the wind because, as I said, the wind is extremely strong over there.
And these are tiny, tiny little toads, much
Yes,
smaller than any we'd see day to day in the UK.
yes,
So
it's about like 2 centimeters long and they weigh less than a gram. So, and the juveniles are extremely small. I mean, a juvenile is maybe 1/5 of your little fingernail, not even. So they could be blown away with some vegetation from a tepui to another one. That's not impossible.
wow, I find it so fascinating that these are environments that we study and we constantly find things out about, but there's still so much we don't know.
Yes, and actually, this is a bit of a problem for these animals because no one sees them. So you have this, how do you say it in English? Out of mind, out of
Oh, out of sight, out of mind.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. So it's not like all these species you see in the rainforest, colorful, everyone knows them, everyone wants to protect them, but these species, no one sees them except a few of scientists going there. But they are at high risk because with the climate change, you have to imagine that the top of these tepuis, they have nowhere to go. So they are already on the very top of the mountain. So if the temperature is increasing, they will just all die because they can't go more up.
Yeah,
So
they
that's
can't just
also,
migrate to somewhere
no, they
that's a
can't.
little bit easier.
They can't migrate in cooler conditions. So that's why it's also important to better understand their thermal biology to see if they could sustain climate change. And actually, my very first results tend to say that actually they could. So it's not a bad news because they are very resilient to high temperature. So for instance, we did some tests, and so one of the maximum temperature you can have on Tepuis is like around 20 degrees. And we saw that some toads they are still okay at 40 degrees, so which is
Oof.
double,
Yeah.
because they have these possibilities to keep their body much cooler than the environment. So they are cold-blooded, so they don't produce their own. So they are depending of the environment for their temperature, and they cope extremely well. So that's so complex than that, because even if they resist to an increase in temperature, maybe their prey or the global environment surrounding them will not survive, so they might die eventually.
So, just to wrap up, is climate change the main threat that they face? Well,
Uh,
anything in the environment in these tipui face, not just the toads.
Yes, unfortunately, there are other problems, again, because of humans. Because you have some of these tepuis that are accessible by foot, like Raima, for instance, and it becomes really a popular destination for tourists. And these tourists, they bring disease, they bring, of course, lots of trash, and you have large parts of Raima that are completely destroyed by tourism. So on Raima, you have periods of time where you can have like up to 600 tourists climbing Roraima in a month. That's a lot for these mountains because it's a very, very fragile ecosystem. So these tourists, they leave a lot of trash. They also they leave human trash, if you see what I mean, with lots of stuff inside. And we already see that there are new disease appearing on tepuis.
So, in order to protect these incredible environments and the organisms that live there, we need to be a lot more careful with how we personally interact with them, as well as the whole problems that we're creating for the rest of the world. But
Yes,
I really hope that, we can be part of leading a positive change on that. Thank you so much, Philippe. That's all we got
you're
time
welcome.
for, but this has been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us where you are as well. If you've enjoyed the show, you can catch Nature Live every Tuesday on the Natural History Museum's Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and our YouTube channel, where you can also find our past shows. Next week on Nature Live, Alistair will be finding out about feathers and fashion with Catherine Rook, Alex Bond, and Teresa Bose. Until then, I'm Khalil Thirlaway, that was Philippe Kok, and this has been Nature Live from the Natural History Museum. Goodbye.